Alright, hello everybody. This is Antonio Wolf, here with my friends Josh and Hyperion. We're doing something different. We're not talking about philosophy for once, although there is going to be philosophical things about this. I would just like to read Franz Kafka's The Trial. I read this last year for the first time, which is very, very late. This is a book where like everybody knows about it. Everybody knows like, oh, Kafka-esque and whatnot, and everybody knows about it, and it's proclaimed to be one of the best books ever. And almost nobody reads it, including myself, until last year. And when I read it, I was kind of shocked, because everything people say about this book can be said to be like almost completely false. Like it has nothing to do with the book. The usual interpretations that people give of this is that it's about political bureaucracies and whatnot, and totalitarianism. This book has nothing to do with it. Almost. I mean, there is something about bureaucracies concerning not state bureaucracies really. It's really an attack against religious institutions, institutional religion, less so than anything to do with politics. So that's really, really interesting. Now, I don't read a lot. I think I've mentioned this quite a bit in prior things where I talk about myself to some extent. I don't read a lot. I don't read stories, despite the fact that I do like art. I do like novels and movies and music and all that stuff. Like I'm a moody person, and I rarely like am in the mood just like do it. Once I do it, I just keep going, because if it's good, it's good. But it takes me a long time just finally getting around to actually just starting. But anyways, I listened to this entire thing in one sitting. Now it's not that long actually, but I listened to it on audiobook a few times. And the audiobook is only about 4.5 hours long, which I listened to that at work in no time. But anyways, this book is, despite the fact that I haven't read many books, I can tell you just from like the experience of this book, I do consider this to be on the top echelons of artworks ever made. It is just aesthetically almost perfect.
Almost.
Well,
it's perfect in its incompleteness.
Yeah, it's incomplete. And in a way, that incompleteness is almost, well, I would say probably perfect.
Yeah.
I say probably because I haven't given it much thought, but if I gave it much thought, I could probably give some good reasons for why it is. What else can be said about this? Well, I think like as you listen to the story, I'm not the greatest reader in the world, so if you don't like it, don't comment. Go and listen to somebody else read it. I know some of you will, anyways. I'm going to ignore you, just so you know.
Well, I doubt they're listening to this section anyways. They're probably just scrolling through. So your warning isn't going to stop them.
I won't mark it. They'll have to listen through it, at least jump through it. But anyways, yeah, all I can say is that the way the story develops, the characters, the scenarios, the concepts deployed are, at least on my understanding of what it is to be beautiful, perfect. It's as you read it, you can visualize it in your head easily. Definitely plays better in your head than any movie could ever possibly achieve it. Although I do think this would be one of the best movies, like
it's
books
not.
to movies you could make. No.
Well,
I know there was a movie. Yeah, there was a movie made based on this. Because it's very trippy. It does lend itself well to a lot of visual stuff, even though like a good bulk of it is psychological, and philosophical to a good degree.
Yeah. That movie, by the way, doesn't follow
the novel perfectly. It has a completely different ending. So if you're expecting just, I'll watch the movie instead, don't do that. Read the book.
Yeah, just read the book anyways. It is really good.
And you should probably read it in German if you know German. But AW doesn't, which is why we're reading it in English.
It's good in English, too.
Yeah, it's good in English.
Even if I didn't know German, the people listening wouldn't.
Well, everyone who speaks German knows English as well, so...
Yeah, but this is the Germans' cultural heritage. They know it.
Yeah, that's true.
The Anglos don't.
Yeah, it'd be like if I were to listen to Germans talking about Moby Dick.
Yeah. What else is there to say? Well, this book is very philosophical. Okay. This isn't a spoiler because everybody already knows this premise. It's literally right at the beginning. One, I never hear any, like, I want to do this, like read this and record it. One, because there's no actual, like, good videos on YouTube about this book, which is surprising, despite, because it's a famous book. And a lot of people refer to it, there's a Kafkaesque and whatnot. Yet there's nothing good on it. I mean, shit, there's some, like, long-form, like, discussions of, like, Philip K. Dick novels, which are nowhere near as good as this. Which nobody cares about. But there's nothing on this. And so I think there's quite a bit to say on this. I don't think we'll be interrupting the story much to say it. But we'll reflect on it a little bit, chapter by chapter, I suppose. Another one is, I'll say this right off. He's guilty. And before I read it, I had never heard anybody say this. Because everybody just focuses on the fact, like, he never found out what he was guilty of, and it was just all like, a kangaroo court, it's just a runaround. He's guilty.
You didn't ask me.
Well, that would be a spoiler. But anyways, I'm saying it now. He's guilty. It's very clear to me that he's guilty, and I do have an account of what he's guilty of. It has to do. It is metaphysical, and it is theological, but not in a. It's not a reference to the Bible. One, Kafka's a Jew, so there are Bible things, but mostly Old Testament stuff. There are some kind of like negative references to New Testament Christian stuff, obviously, particularly the stuff on the critique of religion. But anyways, I'm just gonna say, like, I'll explain that by the end, when we get to the end, when we finish it. And if it's not obvious to people that he is guilty by the end, then I don't know that they're paying attention to who the main character really, like, or like what he's really like. Because throughout the story, you can tell what kind of person he is, and he's not a good person.
He doesn't mean that there's some sort of historical or, like mythological analog. He's not like, he was Adam the whole time or something, like Lucifer the whole time. No, not like that.
He's a shitty person.
Yeah, he's just Joseph K.
Yeah. So, anyways, hopefully by the end it will become clear that he is guilty. It might not be obvious exactly what he's guilty of, but that he's guilty should be clear. But let's get going. So, chapter 1. Someone must have been telling lies about Joseph K. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but one morning he was arrested. Every day at 8 in the morning he was brought his breakfast by Mrs. Grubach's cook. Miss Grubach was his landlady, but today she didn't come. That had never happened before. Kay waited a little while, looked from his pillow at the old woman who lived opposite and was watching him with an inquisitiveness quite unusual for her, and finally, both hungry and disconcerted, rang the bell. There was immediately a knock at the door and a man entered. He had never seen a man in this house before. He was slim but firmly built. His clothes were black and close-fitting, with many folds and pockets, buckles and buttons, and a belt, all of which gave the impression of being very practical but without making it very clear what they were actually for. "Who are you?" asked Kay, sitting half upright in his bed. The man, however, ignored the question as if his rival simply had to be accepted, and merely replied, "Yang? Anna should have brought me my breakfast," said Kay. He tried to work out who the man actually was, first in silence just through observation by thinking about it, but the man didn't stay still to be looked at for very long. Instead, he went over to the door, opened it slightly, and said to someone who was clearly standing immediately behind it, "He wants Anna to bring him his breakfast." There was a little laughter in the neighboring room. It was not clear from the sound of it whether there were several people laughing. The strange man could not have learned anything from it that he hadn't known already. But now he said to Kay, as if making his report, "It is not possible." "It wouldn't be the first time that's happened," said Kay, as he jumped out of bed and quickly pulled on his trousers. "I want to see who that is in next door, and why it is that Miss Grubach has let me be disturbed in this way." It immediately occurred to him that he needed to have said this out loud, and that he must to some extent have acknowledged their authority by doing so, but that didn't seem important to him at the time. That at least is how the stranger looked. That at least is how the stranger took it, as he said. "Don't you think you'd better stay where you are?" "I want neither to stay here nor to be spoken to by you until you've introduced yourself." "I meant it for your own good," said the stranger, and opened the door, this time without being asked. The next room, which Kay entered more slowly than he had intended, looked at first glance exactly the same as it had the previous evening. It was Miss Grubach's living room, overfilled with furniture, tablecloths, porcelain, and photographs. Perhaps there was a little more space in there than usual today, but if so, it was not immediately obvious, especially as the main difference was the presence of a man sitting by the open window with a book from which he now looked up. "You should have stayed in your room. Didn't Franz tell you?" "And what is it And what is it that you want, then?" said Kay, looking back and forth between this new acquaintance and the one named Franz, who had remained in the doorway. Through the open window he noticed the old woman again, who had come close to the window opposite so that she could continue to see everything. She was showing an inquisitiveness that really made it seem like she was going senile. "I want to see Mrs. Grubach," said Kay, making a movement as if tearing himself away from the two men, even though they were standing well away from him, and wanted to go. "No," said the man at the window, who threw his book down on a coffee table and stood up. "You can't go away when you're under arrest." "That's how it seems," said Kay. "And why am I under arrest?" he then asked. "That's something we're not allowed to tell you. Go into your room and wait there. Proceedings are underway and you'll learn about everything all in good time. It's not really part of my job to be friendly towards you like this, but I hope no one, apart from Franz, will hear about it, and he's being more friendly towards you than he should have been under the rules himself. If you carry on having as much good luck as you have been with your arresting officers, then you can reckon on things going well with you." Kay wanted to sit down, but then he saw that, apart from the chair by the window, there was nowhere anywhere in the room where he could sit. "You'll get a chance to see for yourself how true all this is," said Franz, and both men then walked up to Kay. They were significantly bigger than him, especially the second man, who frequently slapped him on the shoulder. The two of them felt Kay's nightshirt and said he would now have to wear one that was of much lower quality, but that they would keep the nightshirt along with his other underclothes and return them to him if his case turned out well. "It's better for you if you give us the things than if you leave them in the storeroom," they said. "Things have a tendency to go missing in the storeroom, and after a certain amount of time, they sell things off, whether the case involved has come to an end or not. And cases like this can last a long time, especially the ones that have been coming up lately. It'd give you the money they got for them, but it wouldn't be very much if it's not what they're offered for them when they sell them on that counts." Sorry, I think I misread that. Let me read it. They'd give you the money they got for them.
Are we doing a reading? Or?
Reading the trial.
I got you.
So, what was it? Let me read that. They'd give you the money they got for them, but it wouldn't be very much, as it's not what they're offered for them when they sell them that counts. It's how much they get slipped on the side, and things like that lose their value anyway when they get passed on from hand to hand, year after year. Kay paid hardly any attention to what they were saying. He did not place much value on what he may have still possessed, or on who decided what happened to them. It was much more important to him to get a clear understanding of his position, but he did not think clearly while these people were here. The second policeman's belly, and they could only be policemen, looked friendly enough, sticking out towards him, but when Kay looked up and saw his dry, bony face, it did not seem to fit with the body. His strong nose twisted to one side as if ignoring Kay, and sharing an understanding with the other policemen. What sort of people were these? What were they talking about? What offices did they belong to? Kay was living in a free country, after all. Everywhere was at peace. All laws were decent and were upheld. Who was it who dared accost him in his own home? He was always inclined to take life as lightly as he could, to cross bridges when he came to them, pay no heed for the future, even when everything seemed under threat. But here that did not seem the right thing to do. He could have taken it all as a joke, a big joke set up by his colleagues at the bank for some unknown reason, or also perhaps because today was his 30th birthday. It was all possible, of course. Maybe all he had to do was laugh in the policeman's face in some way, and they would laugh with him. Maybe they were tradesmen from the corner of the street. They looked like they might be. But he was nonetheless determined, ever since he first caught sight of the one called Franz, not to lose any slight advantage he might have had over these people. There was a very slight risk that people would later say he couldn't understand the joke, but although he wasn't normally in the habit of learning from experience, he might also have had a few unimportant occasions in mind when, unlike his more cautious friends, he had acted with no thought at all for what might follow and had been made to suffer for it. He didn't want that to happen again, not this time at least. If they were play acting, he would act along with them. Just gonna say it's an important paragraph right there. Stuff about should he have taken these people seriously or not? He still had time. "Allow me," he said, hurried between the two policemen into his room. "He seems sensible enough," he heard them say behind him. Once in his room, he quickly open the drawer of his writing desk. Everything in it was very tidy, but in his agitation, he was unable to find the identification documents he was looking for straight away. He finally found his bicycle permit and was about to go back to the policeman with it when it seemed to him too petty, so he carried on searching until he found his birth certificate. Just as he got back in the adjoining room, the door on the other side opened and Miss Grubach was about to enter. Just gotta say, having to have a permit for a bicycle just seems weird.
Well, I don't know. You don't want. I mean,
what year is it? You have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about cars, like, oh, bikers share the road with car drivers, and they have to get a license to be on the road, so maybe bikers should as well, but back in this time, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, what is this, late 1800s?
Early
No.
1800s.
Early 1800s? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is 1915.
Yeah, I suppose they were considered dangerous at a time, but nowadays you don't hear about people being run over by bicycles. Well, motorcycles, but not bicycles. So, birth certificate. Just as he got back in the adjoining room, the door on the other side opened and Miss Grubach was about to enter. He only saw her for an instant, for as soon as she recognized Kay, she was clearly embarrassed, asked for forgiveness, and disappeared, closing the door behind her very carefully. "Do come in," Kay could have said just then. But now he stood in the middle of the room with his papers in his hand, still looking at the door, which did not open again. He stayed like that until he was startled out of it by the shout of the policeman, who sat at the little table at the open window and, as Kay now saw, was eating his breakfast. "Why didn't she come in?" he asked. "Why didn't she come in?" he asked. "She's not allowed to," said the big policeman. "You're under arrest, aren't you?" "But how can I be under arrest? And how come it's like this?" "Now you're starting again," said the policeman, dripping a piece of buttered bread in the honey pot. "We don't answer questions like that." "You will have to answer them," said Kay. Here are my identification papers. Now show me yours, and I certainly want to see the arrest warrant." "Oh my God," said the policeman. "In a position like yours, and you still think you can start giving orders, do you? It won't do you any good to get us on the wrong side, even if you think it will. We're probably more on your side than anyone else, you know." "That's true, you know. You'd better believe it," said Franz, holding a cup of coffee in his hand, which he did not lift to his mouth but looked at Kay, in a way that was probably meant to be full of meaning but could not actually be understood. Kay found himself, without intending it, in a mute dialogue with Franz, but then slapped his hand down on his papers and said, "Here are my identity documents." "And what do you want us to do about it?" replied the big policeman loudly. "The way you're carrying on, it's worse than a child. What is it you want? Do you want to get this great bloody trial of yours over with quickly by talking about ID and arrest warrants with us? We're just coppers, that's all we are. Junior officers like us hardly know one end of an ID card from another, and all we've got to do with you is keep an eye on you for 10 hours a day and get paid for it. That's all we are. Mind you, what we can do is make sure that the high officials we work for find out just what sort of person it is they're going to arrest and why he should be arrested before they issue the warrant. There's no mistake there. Our authorities, as far as I know, and I only know the lowest grades, don't go out looking for guilt among the public. It's the guilt that draws them out, like it says in the law, and they have to send us police officers out. That's the law. Where do you think there'd be any mistake there?" "I don't know this law," said Kay. "So much the worse for you, then," said the policeman. "It probably exists in your heads." "It probably exists only in your heads," said Kay. He wanted in some way to insinuate his way into the thoughts of the policeman, to reshape those thoughts to his benefit or to make himself at home there. But the policeman just said dismissively, "You'll find out when it affects you." Franz joined in and said, "Look at this, Willem. He admits he doesn't know the law and at the same time insists he's innocent." "You're quite right, but we can't get him to understand a thing," said the other. Kay stopped talking with him. He thought to himself, do I really have to carry on getting tangled up with the chattering of base functionaries like this? And they admitted themselves that they are of the lowest position. They're talking about things of which they don't have the slightest understanding anyway. It's only because of their stupidity that they're able to be so sure of themselves. I just need a few words with someone of the same social standing as myself, and everything will be incomparably clearer, much clearer than a long conversation with these two can make it. He walked up and down the free space in the room a couple of times. Across the street he could see the old woman who now had pulled on an old man, much older than herself, up to the window and had her arms around him. Kay had to put an end to this display. "Take me to your superior," he said, "as soon as he wants to see you." He said. "As soon as he wants to see you, not before," said the policeman, the one called Willem. "And now my advice to you," he said, "is to go into your room, stay calm, and wait and see what's done with you. If you take our advice, you won't tire yourself out thinking about things to no purpose. You need to pull yourself together, as there's a lot that's going to be required of you. You've not behaved towards us the way we deserved after being so good to you. You forget that we, whatever we are, we're still free men and you're not, and that's quite an advantage. But in spite of all that, we're still willing. if you've got the money to go and get you some breakfast from the cafe over the road. So this is why reading things is probably better than listening to them. The thing about guilt drawing the law to the people, is something I completely missed out despite listening to this like 4 times.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's very big. The other one is the other big point is them pointing out that he doesn't know the law and yet he still assumes that he's not guilty. And I assume most people would look at that and say, well, that's clearly insane. But that's literally how the law works. You know, literally, it's part of, in the U.S., for example, it said, what is it? Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So even if you break a law and like your excuse is like, well, you didn't know it. Even if you didn't know it, you're still guilty.
Yeah.
But all right.
These are also reasonable men. You know, they're not evil. They're not petty. They're like, hey, we'll get you some breakfast if you want. You know, even though, you know, you're not free to leave. You know, we're not trying to make this harder on you than it has to be.
Yeah, and they're also not, you know, they're giving him advice on what to do with his properties so they don't get sold off or whatever.
Right? Even when he threatens them, basically, they say, well, you shouldn't be threatening us. We're the only ones you've got. You know, we're probably the only friends you would have. You know, if you try to make us your enemies, you'll have no one.
They're not there to judge him.
Yeah, they're just performing their duties. You know, their jobs.
Yep. Although, I mean, like, well, I mean, this is we're doing kind of an analysis as we go. So, the thing about like the very beginning, like, you know, like he says, like he could have not taken this whole thing seriously, but he decided to play along.
Yeah.
So even as he's like playing, even as he's saying like, you know, I want proof, you know, of who you are, he doesn't go through with it. You know, like they're like, oh, you know, we can't, you know, like, now you're being hard and stubborn and like, you know, like you've only got us. He then just immediately backs down, takes their word for it. Now, to go along with this whole thing about like the law and the law being drawn to the guilty, you know, at least, like, you know, like I think everybody has this experience that you've done something wrong and you're in a situation in which you might be caught for it, but you're not sure. And sometimes in not being sure, you give yourself away by assuming that the other person has something on you which they didn't. But it was a complete, like, your own assumption and projection on the thing. Had you just kept on acting as if things were like all right and like they didn't have any notion of your guilt, everything would have been fine. So I think you could say that him playing along with this could be seen as an implicit tell that, yeah, on some level he knows and he believes that he's guilty, and that's why he's playing along, because of that. He's not sure these people really are who they are, but in case they are who they are, because he has that implicit notion that he is guilty, he knows that if it turns out that they're right, he's going to be in worse. Which is not exactly a rational thing to do, when you actually think about it,
It's not a rational thing to do.
yeah, like it's not the rational thing to do. Like,
No.
because even if you're guilty, like, you still ought, like, there has to be an objective process. Actually, in German, this is called, der Prozess or what is right? That's the
Der
title.
Prozess, yeah.
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 Because that's what a trial is called in German, I suppose. The process is required for the full determination of guilt. Because that's the meaning of an objective justice. Because if you're guilty but no one can prove it, as far as it goes, objectively speaking, no one has any reason to treat you otherwise. They can't treat you as guilty without the proof of guilt. Even if you admit to something and they can't prove it, you should not be held to be objectively guilty on that level. It's something interesting. Winfield in his views of law bring up, and he's like, the idea of plea bargains is not something like really just, because rationally speaking, somebody just verbally admitting to something is not proof that they actually did it. So the onus is for an actual just process to take place, that whether the person admits to it or not, the state still has the burden to prove the guilt anyways. There should be no shortcuts.
Right. There ought not be, but there are.
Yeah.
In our material.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking about is how he would act if he were innocent. Because I feel like the way I would act in this situation, these police are like, we're arresting you, you're having a trial. I'd be like, I wouldn't argue with the police about my innocence, because the trial is supposed to work that out. So I'd want to go to court. I'd be down for that, because if I were innocent, I could prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but what if these weren't policemen? Like, what if they, like, I mean, it's just like what happens in real life. Some person comes, like, along, they're dressed like a policeman, and, like, they kind of look like a policeman, they kind of act like a policeman. But, anybody could do that. They can dress up and do the whole thing. And come in, it's like, oh, we got a warrant. And, like, well, where's the warrant? Well, what do you, like, hey, man, we're the police, we're not the judge. Like just asking for basic identification verification is a rational thing to do. You should not leave with just anybody who says that they're a cop.
Sure,
So
but
anyways.
that's a bit tangential.
yeah. So let's get back to the reading. So, the last thing they were doing, they ate his breakfast, and they're like, "We'll still go get your breakfast if you give us the money."
Yeah.
So, without giving any answer to this offer, Case stood still for some time. Perhaps if he opened the door of the next room, or even the front door, the two of them would not dare to stand in his way. Perhaps that would be the simplest way to settle the whole thing, by bringing it to a head. But maybe they would grab him, and if he were thrown down on the ground, he would lose all the advantage he, in a certain respect, had over them. So he decided on the more certain solution, the way things would go in the natural course of events, and went back in his room without another word, either from him or from the policeman. He threw himself down on his bed, and from the dressing table he took the nice apple that he had put there the previous evening for his breakfast. Now it was all the breakfast he had, and anyway, as he confirmed as soon as he took his first big bite of it, it was far better than a breakfast he could have had through the goodwill of the policeman from the dirty cafe. He felt well and confident. He had failed to go into work at the bank this morning, but that could easily be excused because of the relatively high position he held there. Should he really send in his explanation? He wondered about it. If nobody believed him, and in this case that would be understandable, he could bring Mrs. Grubach in as a witness, or even the old pair from across the street, who probably even now were on their way over to the window opposite. It puzzled Kay, at least it puzzled him looking at it from the policeman's point of view, that they had made him go into the room and left him alone there, where he had 10 different ways of killing himself. At the same time, though, he asked himself this time, looking at it from his point of view, what reason he could have to do so. Because those two were sitting there in the next room and had taken some breakfast, perhaps? It would have been so pointless to kill himself that, even if he had wanted to, the pointlessness would have made him unable. Maybe if the policemen had not been so obviously limited in their mental abilities, it could have been supposed that they had come to the same conclusion and saw no danger in leaving him alone because of it. They could watch now, if they wanted, and see how he went over to the cupboard in the wall where he kept a bottle of good schnapps, how he first emptied a glass of it in place of his breakfast, and how he then took a second glass in order to give himself courage, the last one just as a precaution for the unlikely chance it would be needed. Okay, this is this is insane. You're put under house arrest, and you're like, what a bunch of stupid morons. Don't they think that, if I was guilty, I could just kill myself in this room and get away from them? What?
You'd prove your guilt if you killed yourself, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, the fact that he even thought that, the first thing you think is, man, those guys are two morons. Don't they realize I could kill myself here and get away? What kind of thought is that?
It's the thought of a man who thinks he might be guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then going over for the good schnapps, drinking it all. Out of his nervousness,
Yep. So, continuing. Then he was so startled by a shout to him from the other room that he struck his teeth against the glass. "The supervisor wants to see you," a voice said. It was only the shout that startled him. This curt, abrupt, military shout that he would not have expected from the policeman called Franz. In itself, he found the order very welcome. "At last!" he called back, locked the cupboard, and, without delay, hurried into the next room. The two policemen were standing there and chased him back into his bedroom as if that were a matter of course. "What do you think you're doing?" they cried. "Think you're going to see the supervisor dressed in just your shirt, do you? He'd see to it you got a right thumping, and us and all." "Let go of me, for God's sake," called Kay, who had already been pushed back as far as his wardrobe. "If you accost me when I'm still in bed, you can't expect to find me in my evening dress." "That won't help you," said the policeman, who always became very quiet, almost sad, when Kay began to shout, and in that way confused him, or to some extent brought him to his senses. "Ridiculous formalities," he grumbled, as he lifted his coat from the chair and kept it in both his hands for a little while, as if holding it out for the policeman's inspection. They shook their heads. "It's got to be a black coat," they said. At that, Kay threw the coat to the floor and said, without knowing it himself, what he meant by it. "Well, it's not going to be the main trial, after all." The policeman laughed, but continued to exist. "It's got to be a black coat." "Well, that's all right by me if it makes things go any faster," said Kay. He opened the wardrobe himself, spent a long time searching through all the clothes, and chose his best black suit, which had a short jacket that had greatly surprised those who knew him. Then he also pulled out a fresh shirt and began carefully to get dressed. He secretly told himself that he had succeeded in speeding things up by letting the policemen forget to make him have a bath. He watched them to see if they might remember after all, but of course it never occurred to them, although Willem did not forget to send Franz up to the supervisor with a message saying that Kay was getting dressed. So the thing about the bath, that is so weird.
He got one over on me.
Yeah, but I think it's telling already that he wants to take shortcuts.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're
Yeah,
telling
he doesn't
him,
want to
gotta,
do the whole process.
Yeah, they're telling him you got to do things this way, and he's like, well, fine. And then he takes one thing. He's like, haha, I got them. They forgot to make me take a bath. What the fuck? The thing about it's not the main trial after all. very big. Even he doesn't know what he meant by that, but he said it. So once he was properly dressed, Kay had to pass by Willem as he went through the next room into the one beyond, the door of which was already wide open. Kay knew very well that this room had recently been let to a typist called Miss... how do you say that you?
Bürstner.
Bürstner. Okay, Miss Bürstner.
Bürstner. Yeah.
Okay. She was in the habit of going out to work very early and coming back home very late, and Kay had never exchanged more than a few words of greeting with her. Now her bedside table had been pulled into the middle of the room to be used as a desk for these proceedings, and the supervisor sat behind it. He had his legs crossed and had thrown one arm over the backrest of the chair. So, very informal. In one corner of the room, there were 3 young people looking at the photographs belonging to Miss Bürstner, that had been put into a piece of fabric in the wall. Hung up on the handle of the open window was a white blouse. At the window across the street, there was the old pair again, although now their number had increased, as behind them and far taller than they were, stood a man with an open shirt that showed his chest and a reddish goatee, beard which he squeezed and twisted with his fingers. Joseph Kay? Asked the supervisor, perhaps merely to attract Kay's attention as he looked around the room. Kay nodded. I dare say you were quite surprised by all that's been taking place this morning, said the supervisor, as with both hands he pushed away the few items on the bedside table. The candle and box of matches, a book and a pincushion which lay there as if they were things he would need for his own business. Certainly, said Kay. And he began to feel relaxed now that, at last, he stood in front of someone with some sense, someone with whom he would be able to talk about his situation. Certainly I'm surprised, but I'm not in any way very surprised. You're not very surprised? Asked the supervisor, as he positioned the candle in the middle of the table and other things in a group around it. Perhaps you don't quite understand me, Kay hurriedly pointed out. What I mean here is... Here, Kay broke off what he was saying and looked around for someone to sit. I may sit down, mayn't I? He asked. That's not unusual, the supervisor answered.
No, that's not usual.
Oh, sorry. That's not usual, the supervisor answered. What I mean is, said Kay, without delaying a second time, that yes, I'm very surprised, but when you've been in the world for 30 years already and had to make your own way through everything yourself, which has been my lot, then you become hardened to surprises and don't take them too hard, especially not what's happened today. Why especially not what's happened today? I wouldn't want to say that I see all this as a joke. You seem to have gone to too much trouble making all these arrangements for that. Everyone in the house would be taking part in it as well as all of you, but that would be going beyond what could be a joke. So I don't want to say that this is a joke. Quite right, said the supervisor, looking to see how many matches were left in the box. But on the other hand, Kay went on, looking around at everyone there and even wishing he could get the attention of the 3 who were looking at the photographs. On the other hand, this really can't be all that important. That follows from the fact that I've been indicted, but can't think of the slightest offense for which I could be indicted. But even that is all beside the point. The main question is, who is issuing the indictment? What office is conducting this affair? Are you officials? None of you is wearing a uniform, unless what you are wearing, he turned towards Franz, is meant to be a uniform. It's actually more of a traveling suit. I require a clear answer to all these questions, and I'm quite sure that once things have been made clear, we can take our leave of each other on the best of terms. The supervisor slammed the box of matches down on the table. You're making a big mistake, he said. These gentlemen and I have got nothing to do with your business. In fact, we know almost nothing about you. We could be wearing uniforms as proper and exact as you like, and your situation wouldn't be any the worse for it. As to whether you're on charge, I can't give you any sort of clear answer to that. I don't even know whether you are or are not. You're under arrest, you're quite right about that, but I don't know any more than that. Maybe these officers have been chit-chatting with you. Well, if they have, that's all it is, chit-chat. I can't give you an answer to your questions, but I can give you a bit of advice. You'd better think less about us and what's going to happen to you, and think a bit more about yourself. And stop making all this fuss about your sense of innocence. You don't make such a bad impression, but with all this fuss, you're damaging it. And you ought to do a bit less talking, too. Almost everything you've said so far has been things we could have taken from your behavior, even if you said no more than a few words. And what you have said has not exactly been in your favor. Okay, this... I somewhat remember this, but reading this, wow, that's very clear. So to go back to what I said at the beginning, he's guilty. What is he guilty of? What he's guilty of has to do with who he is, as the kind of person he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's still the mystery of what he's being charged with, who's charging him, but they're telling him, one, it doesn't matter. Stop worrying about who or what, and start worrying about yourself. I don't think this is a spoiler, honestly, so I'm going to go ahead and say it. The trial is the trial of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's a trial and the trial of life is a trial of your life. And in your life, is it a trial of what specifically? About who you are. That it's a trial is a test, because this is a trial not merely in a legal case. It's a trial as a trial of deeds, of actions, of troubles. Life is a trial.
Yeah.
And what is important about the trial, ultimately? Is it the things that you achieve? Is it not? In this case, the trial is, who are you? What kind of person are you? It doesn't matter, what it is that you face, so much as, how you face things.
Yeah. It's about the development of facing the crucible, the trial. And keep in mind, it's his 30th birthday. And he's acting completely immature. So, that should give a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that struck me right from the beginning is his first demand is for this lady to make his breakfast. As a 30-year-old man, as if he can't make his own breakfast. And he's like, she needs to make my breakfast. He's just impatient and upset about something that really he shouldn't be.
Yeah. He's empty. He wants life to not necessarily end, but he's just like, okay, whatever, get it over with, I don't have to wait and take a bath. I can get this over with faster. I can kill myself and get it over with faster.
It's telling of someone who's guilty. He'd want his trial to be faster so they don't sift through all the details that could prove his guilt. I would think someone innocent would want it to be thorough.
Yeah, but again, it's not about necessarily being innocent or guilty of anything in particular, except being undeveloped.
Yeah.
And maybe that is a spoiler, but it's not explicit. I think it's explicit, but, it's explicit for me, having read it multiple times, but it's never said outright. Is AW still here? Hello? Is anyone here?
I am.
Oh, okay. So basically, the way he's speaking is they're like, yeah, we know the things that you're saying could be judged just based on how you've been acting. You didn't need to say much, and you've said way too much. It's like, we get it. You don't need to say too much. You're not helping yourself. You're not helping your case. But continuing on and on, you're just digging yourself deeper. And we all do that, but...
Yeah. I think my microphone cut off there for a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I was mentioning that one, he's an elitist prick. He looks down on other people who aren't on the same level. And it's for superficial reasons. He's like, oh look, they're not dressed like nice or properly, and like even they explain to him, look, even if we were dressed to your standards, even if like we conducted our manners in your standards, this would be no different. Like, you'd still be under arrest. You'd still have to go through the trial.
Yeah, he's focused on superficial things from their perspective. And it's true. I would say it's actually accurate.
Alright, let's continue. Kay stared at the supervisor. Was this man, probably younger than he was, lecturing him like a schoolmaster? Was he being punished for his honesty with a telling off? And was he to learn nothing about the reasons for his arrest or those who were arresting him? He became somewhat cross and began to walk up and down. No one stopped him doing this, and he pushed his sleeves back, felt his chest straightened in his hair, went over to the three men, said, "It makes no sense," at which these three turned round to face him and came towards him with serious expressions. He finally came again to a halt in front of the supervisor's desk. "State Attorney Hastur is a good friend of mine," he said. "Can I telephone him?" "No, certainly," said the supervisor, "but I don't know what the point of that will be. I suppose you must have some private matter you want to discuss with him." "What the point is," shouted Kay, more disconcerted than cross. "Who do you think you are? You want to see some point in it while you're carrying out something pointless as it could be? It's enough to make you cry. These gentlemen first accost me, and now they sit or stand about in here and let me be hauled up in front of you. What point there would be in telephoning a state attorney when I'm ostensibly under arrest? Very well, I won't make the telephone call. Very well, I won't make the telephone call." "You can call him if you want to," said the supervisor, stretching his hand out towards the outer room where the telephone was. "Please, go on. Do make your phone call." "No, I don't want to anymore," said Kay, and went over to the window. Across the street, the people were still there at the window, and it was only now that Kay had gone up to his window that they seemed to become uneasy about quietly watching what was going on. The old couple wanted to get up, but the man behind them calmed them down. "We've got some kind of audience over there," called Kay to the supervisor, quite loudly, as he pointed out with his forefinger. "Go away!" he then called across to them, and the three of them did immediately retreat a few steps. The old pair even found themselves behind the man, who then concealed them with the breath of his body and seemed, going by the movements of his mouth, to be saying something incomprehensible into the distance. They did not disappear entirely, though, but seemed to be waiting for the moment when they could come back to the window without being noticed. "Intrusive, thoughtless people," said Kay as he turned back into the room. The supervisor may have agreed with him. At least Kay thought that was what he saw from the corner of his eye. But it was just as possible that he had not even been listening, as he had his hand pressed firmly down on the table and seemed to be comparing the length of his fingers. The two policemen were sitting on a chest covered with a colored blanket, rubbing their knees. The three young people had put their hands on their hips and were looking around aimlessly. Everything was still, like in some office that has been forgotten about. "Now, gentlemen," called out Kay. For a moment it seemed as if he was carrying out all of them on his shoulders. "It looks like your business with me is over with. In my opinion, it's best now to stop wondering about whether you're proceeding correctly or incorrectly, and to bring the matter to a peaceful close with a mutual handshake. If you are of the same opinion, then please." And he walked up to the supervisor's desk and held out his hand to him. The supervisor raised his eyes, bit his lip, and looked at Kay's outstretched hand. Kay still believed the supervisor would do as he suggested. But instead, he stood up, picked up a hard, round hat that was lying on Miss Bürstner's bed, and put it carefully onto his head, using both hands as if trying on a new hat. "Everything seems so simple to you, doesn't it?" he said to Kay, as he did so. "So you think we should bring the matter to a peaceful close, do you?" No, that won't do. Mind you, on the other hand, I certainly wouldn't want you to think there's no hope for you. Now, why should you think that? No, why should you think that? You're simply under arrest. Nothing more than that. That's what I had to tell you. That's what I've done, and now I've seen how you've taken it. That's enough for one day, and we could take our leave of each other, for the time being at least. I expect you'll want to go into the bank now, won't you? Into the bank? Asked Kay. I thought I was under arrest. Kay said this with a certain amount of defiance, as, although his handshake had not been accepted, he was feeling more independent of all these people, especially since the supervisor had stood up. He was playing with them. If they left, he had decided he would run after them and offer to let them arrest him. That's why he even repeated it. How can I go into the bank when I'm under arrest? I see you've misunderstood me, said the supervisor, who was already at the door. It's true that you're under arrest, but that shouldn't stop you from carrying out your job, and there shouldn't be anything to stop you carrying on with your usual life. In that case, it's not too bad being under arrest, said Kay, and went up close to the supervisor. I never meant it should be anything else, he replied. It hardly seems to have been necessary to notify me of the arrest in that case, said Kay, and went on even closer. The others had also come closer. All of them had gathered together into a narrow space by the door. That was my duty, said the supervisor. A silly duty, said Kay, unyielding. Maybe so, replied the supervisor. Only let's not waste our time talking on like this. I had assumed you'd be wanting to go to the bank. As you're paying close attention to every word, I'll add this. I'm not forcing you to go to the bank. I just assumed you wanted to. And to make things easier for you and to let you get to the bank with as little fuss as possible, I put these three gentlemen, colleagues of yours, at your disposal. What's that? Exclaimed Kay, and looked at the three in astonishment. He could only remember seeing them in their group by the photographs, but these characterless, anemic young people were indeed officials from his bank, not colleagues of his. That was putting it too high, and it showed a gap in the omniscience of the supervisor, but they were nonetheless junior members of staff at the bank. How could Kay have failed to see that? How occupied he must have been with the supervisor and the policeman not to have recognized these three. Rabensteiner, with his stiff demeanor and swinging hands, Kulich, with his blonde hair and deep-set eyes, and Kaminer, with his involuntary grin caused by chronic muscle spasms. Good morning, said Kay after a while, extending his hand to the gentleman as they bowed correctly to him. I didn't recognize you at all, so we'll go into work now, shall we? The gentleman laughed and nodded enthusiastically, as if that was what they had been waiting for all the time, except that Kay had left his hat in his room, so they all dashed one after another into the room to fetch it, which caused a certain amount of embarrassment. Kay stood where he was and watched them through the open double doorway. The last to go, of course, was the apathetic Rabensteiner, who had broken into no more than an elegant trot. Kaminer got to the hat, and Kay, as he had often had to do at the bank, forcibly reminded himself that the grin was not deliberate, that he in fact wasn't able to grin deliberately. At that moment, Mrs. Grubach opened the door from the hallway into the living room where all the people were. She did not seem to feel guilty about anything at all, and Kay, as often before, looked down at the belt of her apron, which for no reason cut so deeply into her hefty body. Just had to comment on that. She did not seem to feel guilty about anything at all. Why would she feel guilty about anything at all? Why would Kay think of this?
I hope that's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, just something for the audience to think about. So once again downstairs, Kay, with his watch in his hand, decided to take a taxi. He had already been delayed by half an hour, and there was no need to make the delay any longer. Commoner ran to the corner to summon it, and the two others were making obvious efforts to keep Kay diverted when Kulik pointed to the doorway of the house on the other side of the street, where the large man with the blonde goatee beard appeared, and a little embarrassed at first at letting himself be seen in his full height, sat back to the wall and leaned against it. The old couple were probably still on the stairs. Kay was cross with Kulik for pointing out this man whom he had already seen himself, in fact, whom he had been expecting. "Don't look at him," he snapped, without noticing how odd it was to speak to free men in this way. But there was no explanation needed anyway, as just then the taxi arrived. They sat inside and set off. Inside the taxi, Kay remembered that he had not noticed the supervisor and the policeman leaving. The supervisor had stopped him noticing the three bank staff, and now the three bank staff had stopped him noticing the supervisor. They showed that Kay was not very attentive, and he resolved to watch himself more carefully in this respect. Nonetheless, he gave in no thought as he twisted himself around and leant over onto the rear shelf of the car to catch sight of the supervisor and the policeman if he could. But he turned back round straight away and leaned comfortably into the corner of the taxi without even having made the effort to see anyone. Although it did not seem like it, now was just the time when he needed some encouragement, but the gentleman seemed tired just then. Rabensteiner looked out of the car to the right, Kulik to the left, and only Commoner was there with a grin at Kay's service. It would have been inhumane to make fun of that. So, pretty good paragraph showing, yet again, that he's a fucking prick. He's an elitist, and he keeps taking shortcuts with things. Like, he notices one about being the prick thing. His attendants, who are also fellow co-workers, which he looks down upon. And he says, like, well, they're not really colleagues. They're below me. The thing in which, like, they pointed out, hey, look, those people are staring. He's like, yeah, like, don't look at them. He doesn't explain to them, yeah, I know. And he's like, he snaps at them because, like, he already knew. But it's just a fucking asshole thing to do. He's like, like, don't tell me about that. I already know. At least tell them you already know. And you don't even have to be an asshole about it. He's like, oh yeah, I know. I know that guy's staring at me. I know, like, the old man and woman are staring at me. It's okay. Then he realizes that he's been losing his train of attention on the people he wants to know something about. Turns around and says, I'll see, like, when they leave or if they leave. And immediately turns around and says, like, I'm not even going to bother. Yet again, another shortcut, it's like being lazy. Being lazy and not... He notices that this is somehow serious. Like, they've arranged this whole thing, and he's like, okay, it can't be a joke. But then because of the thing that they tell him, like, well, you're under arrest, but you get to go, he then stops taking it seriously again. Despite the fact that he already knows that, at least from what's transpired so far, there's some significant seriousness to it. So it's irresponsibility. Also the thing about the three assistants, like, there's something off about all three of them. Although I kind of find it funny that the second one, what's off about him is that he's blonde and his eyes are too blue.
Or
one of them. I forget which one it was.
It's important.
To supervisor's eyes. Or is it so simple to you let's see. Rabensteiner, stiff demeanor, swinging hands. Kulish. Kulik first. With his blonde hair and deep set eyes. Oh, he doesn't have blue eyes, but just the deep set eyes. commoner who has the muscle spasm problem.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Who was it? Kulich to the left. Who was it that pointed out? Oh, Kulich is the ones who pointed out the guy and the old people watching him. Which, given that he has deep set eyes, it's a visual metaphor. Somebody who's a good watcher. Pays attention visually to details. Another point about his assholishness, and this is just it's beyond being an asshole, I think. When he says about the third one, just forget his name again. Robinstein, Coolish, Commoner. But when Commoner goes, and to get his hat and bring it back, I forget which one's the one that grabbed it, but Commoner got the hat. Yeah, it was Commoner.
Yeah,
he gives it to Kay, and Kay says, he had a grin on his face. Of course, he got the hat. He gave it to him, and he was smiling. And then Kay thinks but he's not really smiling. He can't even form a genuine smile because it's not a deliberate smile. It can't be a deliberate one. So he just assumes he's not happy to help him.
Sure.
Which is, I don't know what word you would use for that kind of person who has that kind of mentality. It's just this idea that it's very atomistic. Yeah, 'cause it's just this idea, everybody is out for themselves. I'm out for myself. I'm selfish and I'm a prick. So these people are just selfish and a prick. Obviously, if he could control his smiling, he wouldn't have smiled. Because he doesn't believe that these people are actually there to help him. Even though when he tells them to do something, already they've described they've been quite eager to do what they can to help him. So, alright, continuing. That spring, whenever possible, Kay usually spent his evenings after work. He usually stayed in the office until 9 o'clock, with a short walk either by himself or in the company of some of the bank officials, and then he would go into a pub where he would sit at the regulars' table with mostly older men until 11. There were, however, also exceptions to this habit. Times, for instance, when Kay was invited by the bank's manager, whom he greatly respected for his industry and trustworthiness, to go with him for a ride in his car or to eat dinner with him at his large house. Kay would also go once a week to see a girl called Elsa, who worked as a waitress in a wine bar, through the night until late in the morning. During the daytime, she only received visitors while still in bed. Is that a euphemism for someone? Maybe. That evening.
Well, yeah.
That evening, though, the day had passed quickly with a lot of hard work and many respectful and friendly birthday greetings. Kay wanted to go straight home. Each time he had any small break from the day's work, he considered, without knowing exactly what he had in mind, that Mrs. Grubach's flat seemed to have been put into great disarray by the events of that morning, and that it was up to him to put it back into order. Once order had been restored, every trace of those events would have been erased, and everything would take its previous course once more. In particular, there was nothing to fear from the three bank officials. They had immersed themselves back into their paperwork, and there was no alteration to be seen in them. Kay had called each of them, separately or all together, into his office that day for no other reason than to observe them. He was always satisfied and had always been able to let them go again. About 9:30 that evening, when he arrived back in front of the building where he lived, he met a young lad in the doorway who was standing there, his legs apart and smoking a pipe. "Who are you?" immediately asked Kay, bringing his face close to the lad's, as it was hard to see in the half-light of the landing. "I'm the landlord's son, sir," answered the lad, taking the pipe from his mouth and stepping to one side. "The landlord's son?" asked Kay, and impatiently knocked on the ground with his stick. "Did you want anything, sir? Would you like me to fetch my father?" No. said Kay. There was something forgiving in his voice, as if the boy had harmed him in some way and he was excusing him. It's all right, he said then, and went on. But before going up the stairs, he turned around once more. I assume he's the kind of person who gets offended by poor people being around his vicinity. I mean, something to point out here, I think it's already obvious in what's being said in the story so far. He seems to have something about holding everyone else to be guilty of something for whatever reason.
Yep.
Yeah, he's projecting.
So, alright, continuing. He could have gone directly to his room, but as he wanted to speak with Mrs. Grubach, he went straight to her door and knocked. She sat at the table with a knitted stocking and a pile of old stockings in front of her. Kay apologized, a little embarrassed at coming so late, but Mrs. Grubach was very friendly and did not want to hear any apology. She was always ready to speak to him. He knew very well that he was her very best and her favorite tenant. Kay looked around the room. It looked exactly as it usually did. The breakfast dishes, which had been on the table by the window that morning, had already been cleared away. A woman's hands will do many things when no one's looking, he thought. He might himself have smashed all the dishes on the spot, but certainly would not have been able to carry it all out. Wait, what?
He's a sociopath.
Yeah, what the hell? He looked at Mrs. Grubach with some gratitude. Why are you working so late? He asked. They were now both sitting at the table, and Kay now and then sank his hands into the pile of stockings. There's a lot of work to do, she said. During the day, I belong to the tenants. If I'm to sort out my own things, there are only the evenings left to me. I fear I may have caused you some exceptional work today. How do you mean, Mr. Kay? She asked, becoming more interested in leaving her work in her lap. I mean the men who were here this morning. Oh, I see, she said, and went peacefully back to what she was doing. That was no trouble, not especially. Kay looked on in silence as she took up the knitted stocking once more. She seems surprised at my mentioning it, he thought. She seems to think it's improper for me to mention it. All the more important for me to do so. An old woman is the only person I can speak about it with. But it must have caused some work for you, he said. But it won't happen again. No, it can't happen again, she agreed, and smiled at Kay in a way that was almost pained. Do you mean it seriously? Asked Kay. Yes, she said, more gently. But the important thing is you mustn't take it too hard. There are so many awful things happening in the world. As you're being so honest with me, Mr. Kay, I can admit to you that I listened to a little of what was going on from behind the door, and that those two policemen told me one or two things as well. It's all to do with your happiness, and that's something that's quite close to my heart, perhaps more than it should be, as I am, after all, only your landlady. Anyway, so I heard one or two things, but I can't really say that it's about anything very serious. No, you have been arrested, but it's not in the same way as when they arrest a thief. If you're arrested in the same way as a thief, then it's bad, but an arrest like this, it seems to me that it's something very complicated. Forgive me if I'm saying something stupid, something very complicated that I don't understand, but something that you don't really need to understand anyway. Okay, so I completely missed out on my previous listens. It's about his happiness. Interesting. There's nothing stupid about what you said, Mrs. Grubach, or at least I probably agree with you, only the way I judge the whole thing is harsher than yours, and think it's not only something complicated, but simply a fuss about nothing. I was just caught up unawares. That's what happened. If I had got up as soon as I was awake without letting myself get confused because Anna wasn't there, if I'd got up and paid no regard to anyone who might have been in my way and come straight to you, if I'd done something like having my breakfast in the kitchen as an exception, asked you to bring my clothes from my room, in short, if I had behaved sensibly, then nothing more would have happened. Everything that was waiting to happen would have been stifled. People are so often unprepared. In the bank, for example, I am well prepared. Nothing of the sort could possibly happen to me there. I have my own assistant there. There are telephones for internal, external calls in front of me on the desk. I continually receive visits from people, representatives, officials. But besides that, and most importantly, I'm always occupied with my work. And that's to say, I'm always alert. It would even be a pleasure for me to find myself faced with something of that sort. But now it's over with, and I didn't really even want to talk about it anymore, only I wanted to hear what you, as a sensible woman, thought about it all. And I'm very glad to hear that we're in agreement. But now you must give me your hand. An agreement of this sort needs to be confirmed with a handshake. Yeah, so there he is projecting onto her his own interpretation. I mean, she said something it completely, didn't process in his brain.
There he goes, trying to make contracts with people again.
Yeah, and it's contracts over what? It's not even, it doesn't even make sense. I mean, this one's a very clear one.
Would you shake my hand? No, you must give me your hand.
Yeah, I think just another thing to say, this paragraph is pretty straightforward.
Maybe.
He thinks that he thinks that this partly is to blame for him, but he also keeps blaming other people. If I was caught up unawares, I was just caught up unawares. If I had got up as soon as I was awake without letting myself get confused because Anna wasn't there, part of it is Anna's fault. If I had paid no regard to anyone, and gone straight to you, asked you to bring my clothes from my room, if I had ordered you to do something else, it would have been, everything would have been okay.
Or if I were at my bank, my assistants would have dealt with it.
It's the world revolves around him, in his view. And nobody else, at least so far, nobody else has real agency in his from the way he acts towards people, except for the cops that he's, and even then he's kind of reluctant. He's oh, it's really just the structures there, the office that they work for.
No, they're just morons who can't even dress themselves properly.
Well, I mean, it's weird how he thinks about their agency, because he also thinks them to be guilty.
Yeah, and in order to be guilty, you have to be an agent.
Yeah.
So whatever. But this is interesting. Also at another level, because he thinks this way. On a metaphysical level, he is the only one that could possibly be guilty, because he's the only agent in his world.
I mean, I'm also thinking, I know Kafka's a Jew, but he is in a Christian country. So these sorts of ideas are in the air, but I am thinking of, the shit in the New Testament about how, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. He is not doing that. And I feel that's part of why he's guilty. He just assumes this guilt of everyone else and won't forgive them. But he demands to be forgiven for his own guilt, whether they're real or not.
Yeah, and consciously he denies that he's guilty of anything. He's there can't possibly be anything. I haven't done anything. He's like, I can't think of anything I've done that could possibly make me guilty of anything.
He's like Job in that regard.
So, anyways, let's continue. So,
Well, but he's not like Job.
He's nothing like Job in other ways, but he's like Job, insisting that I haven't done anything. There's no reason for it. No, I'm not saying he's Job.
No, like Job accepts his fate.
Right. Yeah, it's nothing like Job.
let's continue. So, has a conversation. So, tries to shake her hand. Will she shake hands with me? The supervisor didn't shake hands, he thought, and looked at the woman differently from before, examining her. She stood up, as he had also stood up, and was a little self-conscious. She hadn't been able to understand everything that Kay said. As a result of this self-consciousness, she said something that she certainly did not intend and certainly was not appropriate. Don't take it so hard, Mr. Kay, she said, with tears in her voice, and also, of course, forgetting the handshake.
I thought it was tears.
Oh, tears. Yeah, that's spelled the same way.
Yeah.
Tears in her voice. Forgetting the handshake. I didn't know I was taking it hard, said Kay, feeling suddenly tired and seeing that if this woman did agree with him, it was of very little value.
No, that's definitely a key thing. His taking it hard.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely... You were totally right to bring up Job, Hyperion. Because it's
What?
exactly...
I was right about something?
No, but the point is, like... Because this is about... sort of just wrongdoings in the world in general being done to you. He is in a selfish position where he believes nothing bad should ever happen to him. And he takes it hard when things that are bad happen to him. He doesn't trust in or believe in the process like Job did.
Right, but he doesn't take everything. He takes everything hard. He takes everything. So he's like, I'm not taking anything particularly hard, but he treats everything that way. So for him, it's not he doesn't feel like he's taking it that seriously because he overanalyzes. He goes on these weird sociopathic trains of thought.
He's distrustful of everyone and everything.
And yet he wants to control everyone and everything.
Well, he wants to because he has no trust.
Right.
If he had trust, if he had faith, he wouldn't feel like he has to control everyone or everything.
The hard thing, though, is as the story develops, it definitely shows up even stronger. An interesting thing, though, is everyone else seems to be aware of what the nature of the charge is. But and it seems to me some people have told him already. She's told him it's about your happiness. The guy who was the supervisor told him it's about who you are. Don't worry about the charge, don't worry about the things, worry about you. This is about you. And he didn't listen to them. And so the other people can see that he's clearly he's going to be increasingly bothered by this, and everybody knows why, except for him. And I think that as a reader, is like when we have that in mind, that he is guilty. It's very clear already what kind of things he's guilty of. He's really an unreflective, not self-conscious person.
And that's what's kind of funny about it, is like in one sense he does seem to be obsessed with finding out what he's guilty of, what the charges are. But he's also not serious about it.
And
he's not serious in the correct way.
Yeah, and he keeps looking on the surface. Actually, I might as well make this point. Part of what makes this great, this makes this a great story, is that the fact that I never had heard anybody say he's guilty, because nowhere in the book does it say he is guilty. And in the same way that he's told, it's not about the things, and it's not about the opposite, it's not about the people, it's about you. And what is it to be you? It's the way you are. So it's the way things are happening, the way things are relating. That's how you come to understand what's happening in this book and why it's happening. When you look at how he actually relates to people and how events are actually unfolding, that's what tells you what the actual meaning is. If people are looking for anywhere in the book where it actually finally just says here it is, they're never going to find it. And that's part of what makes a great work of art of any kind. A work of art that tells you its meaning is a piece of shit.
It's also really telling that everyone pretty much everyone interpreting it, talking about this book, is Joseph K.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Honestly speaking, had I read this earlier in my life, I probably would be like everybody else and would have just interpreted this in the regular politics way, and I would have thought that oh, poor Joseph K. was innocent, and it was just a horrible bureaucracy and totalitarianism. It really, I must say and qualify this that you probably couldn't get the actual deeper meanings of this book without some background in significant personal life experience and philosophical experience.
Yeah, you have to be reflective, just like how Joseph K. has to be reflective. The readers are wanting it to be served on a platter to them, just as Joseph K. is.
Yep. Alright, let's continue. Oh, and just another thing, the whole thing, she didn't shake hands with him, and so, didn't perform a contract over what, it's not clear. But he's oh, well, even if she had, what value is it? She's a nobody, she's just an old lady. He just really looks down on people. So, continuing. Before going out the door, he asked, "Is Miss Bürstner home?" "No," said Mrs. Grubach, smiling as she gave this simple piece of information, saying something sensible at last. "She's at the theater." Yeah, it's just sensible at last. He's just a fucking dick. "She's at the theater. Did you want to see her? Should I give her a message?" I just wanted to have a few words with her." "I'm afraid I don't know when she's coming in. She usually gets back late when she's been to the theater." "It really doesn't matter," said Kay, his head hanging as he turned to the door to leave. "I just wanted to give her my apology for taking over her room today." "Oh, there's no need for that, Mr. K. You're too conscientious. The young lady doesn't know anything about it. She hasn't been home since early this morning, and everything's been tidied up again. You can see for yourself." And she opened the door to Miss Bürstner's room. Thank you. I'll take your word for it. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I find that interaction kind of interesting, that he wants to apologize about something that he did wrong.
He's just desperate for people to be like, oh, that's okay. That's how I read it.
That makes sense.
And he's not conscientious. This is a lie. He doesn't want to do what's right. He doesn't care about what's right.
Well, yeah, I guess in wanting to apologize, mostly what he's wanting to do is he wants her to forgive him.
Right.
He wants forgiveness.
Yeah. Even though he knows that it didn't even affect her because she wasn't even there.
Yeah, well, we'll see in a little bit that there's an ulterior motive behind that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see. Thank you. I'll take your word for it, said Kay, but went nonetheless over to open the door. The moon shone quietly into the unlit room. As far as could be seen, everything was indeed in its place. Not even the blouse was hanging on the window handle. The pillows on the bed looked remarkably plump as they lay half in the moonlight. Miss Bürstner often comes home late, said Kay, looking at Mrs. Grubach as if that were her responsibility. That's how young people are, said Mrs. Grubach, in to excuse herself. Of course, said Kay. But it can be taken too far. Yes, it can be, said Miss Grubach. You're so right, Mr. Kay. Perhaps it is in this case. I certainly wouldn't want to say anything nasty about Miss Bürstner. She is a good, sweet girl, friendly, tidy, punctual, works hard. I appreciate all that very much. But one thing is true. She ought to have more pride, be a bit less forthcoming. Twice this month already, in the street over the way, I've seen her with a different gentleman. I really don't like saying this, but you're the only one I've said this to, Mr. K. I swear to God, but I'm going to have no choice but to have a few words with Miss Bürstner about it myself. And it's not the only thing about her that I'm worried about. Miss Grubach, you're on quite the wrong track, said Kay, so angry that he was hardly able to hide it. And you have moreover misunderstood what I was saying about Miss Bürstner. That is not what I meant. In fact, I warned you quite directly not to say anything to her. You are quite mistaken. I know Miss Bürstner very well, and there is no truth at all in what you say. And what's more, perhaps I'm going too far. I don't want to get in your way. Say to her whatever you see fit. Good night. Mr. K, said Mrs. Grubach, as if asking him for something and hurrying to his door, which he had already opened. I don't want to speak to Miss Bürstner at all. Not yet. Of course, I'll continue to keep an eye on her. But you're the only one I've told what I know. And it is, after all, something that everyone who lets rooms has to do if she's to keep the house decent. That's all I'm trying to do. Decent? Called out Kay through the crack in the door. If you want to keep the house decent, you'll first have to give me notice. Then he slammed the door, and there was a gentle knocking to which he paid no more attention. What the fuck? It's just like, it seems like just a completely random blow up.
Yeah, at this point, but not. We know why.
He did not feel at all like going to bed, so he decided to stay up, and this would also give him the chance to find out when Miss Bürstner would arrive home. Perhaps it would also still be possible, even if a little inappropriate, to have a few words with her. As he lay there by the window, pressing his hands to his tired eyes, he even thought for a moment that he might punish Mrs. Grubach by persuading Miss Bürstner to give in her notice at the same time as he would. But he immediately realized that would be shockingly excessive, that there would even be the suspicion that he was moving house because of the incidents of that morning. Nothing would have been more nonsensical and, above all, more pointless and contemptible. He just has like the most extreme overreactions to things.
Well, it's also interesting how it's all self-centered. Like, in that exchange earlier, he said, what is it? she comes home late in a way that's sort of blaming. And then his landlady talks about it in the sense of how it's bad for her, in a way that's, like it's a moral judgment. She thinks she's not living in a way that's good for herself, or whatever, or that brings decency to the building. But that's not what he cares about. He says, like, what is it exactly that he says? You have moreover misunderstood what I was saying about Miss Bürstner. That is not what I meant. And what he meant was, he doesn't think she should be home late because he needs to talk to her. That's the only reason. It's selfish. He doesn't give a shit about her.
Yeah, very basic. More evidence for the file.
Now, like, I assume, like, in the standard reading where he's supposed to be innocent, the reading is supposed to be that the landlady is too nosy, and that, you shouldn't mind other people's businesses, as he's doing.
Sure. Normal reading. The typical moron giving their normatively valid point.
Yeah.
They're wrong, John.
But I mean,
we're reading this to correct the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I mean, I guess I want to hammer at home, like, how bad of a person he is. I mean, like, and it's not even just a bad, like, this is like a really bad case. Like, he is like extreme. I mean, the lady just said something that he didn't like, and for that he's like, I should punish her, and like, I should convince this other person to like financially harm her, so we'll leave this place on the same day. Like, what the hell? And then the reason he doesn't do it is like, it's too close to the event of this morning, so people will look at it and think that it's because of what happened this morning about the people who came to arrest him, and that it would be some kind of implicit admission of guilt. He's like, oh, no, forget it. He's like, I can't do that. People would think people would think that I did it because I'm guilty or something. So don't want to do that. Selfish reasons all around.
Yeah, so, like, you might think for a second that he wants to put forth a principle of, minding your own business, not being nosy about others. But he doesn't care about that.
Right.
That's what it demonstrates.
So, alright, continuing. When he had become tired of looking out onto the empty street, he slightly opened the door to the living room so that he could see anyone who entered the flat from where he was and lay down on the couch. He lay there quietly smoking a cigar until about 11 o'clock. He wasn't able to hold out longer than that and went a little way into the hallway, as if in that way he could make Miss Bürstner arrive sooner. He had no particular desire for her. He could not even remember what she looked like, but now he wanted to speak to her, and it irritated him that her late arrival home meant this day would be full of unease and disorder right to its very end. It was also her fault that he had not had any dinner that evening, and that he had been unable to visit Elsa as he had intended. He could still make up for both of those things, though, if he went to the wine bar where Elsa worked. He wanted to do so even later after the discussion with Miss Bürstner. So yet again, he's blaming Miss Bürstner for him not having dinner because he wanted to talk to her, and she doesn't plan her days around his random days.
Yeah, not much to say there. Hello?
Yeah, you're...
Oh, AW cut out again, I think.
Hello? Hello, hello.
You're back.
Okay. Let's see, let me go back. So there's that reading, the popular reading that Joseph K. is standing for Kafka, and so they try to make this a biographical kind of the biographical like narrative form, literary interpretation, which doesn't seem good to me because as far as I know, Kafka wasn't an asshole of this kind. There's some things that are obviously every author puts something of themselves in the characters that they make, but and the name, the K, Kafka.
Well, he's also the police officer.
Yeah, Franz,
Franz.
the police officer.
And
I think there.
He thought it was ugly.
I think there is that if you take that little biographical interpretation, it goes along with the fundamental theme of what I think this story's about. Which, I'll go into details of that later on as it comes along. So, anyways, continuing. It was already gone 11:30 when someone could be heard in the stairway. Kay, who had been lost in his thoughts in the hallway, walking up and down loudly as if it were his own room, fled behind his door. Miss Bürstner had arrived. Shivering, she pulled a silk shawl over her slender shoulders as she locked the door. The next moment she would certainly go into her room, where Kay ought not to intrude in the middle of the night. That meant he would have to speak to her now, but unfortunately he had not put the electric light on in his room so that when he stepped out of the dark it would give the impression of being an attack, and would certainly, at the very least, have been quite alarming. There was no time to lose, and in his helplessness he whispered through the crack of the door, "Miss Bürstner." It sounded like he was pleading with her, not calling to her. "Is there someone there?" asked Miss Bürstner, looking around with her eyes wide open. "It's me," said Kay, and came out. "Oh, Mr. K," said Miss Bürstner with a smile. "Good evening," and offered him her hand. "I wanted to have a word with you, if you would allow me." "Now?" asked Miss Bürstner. "Does it have to be now?" "It is a little odd, isn't it? I've been waiting for you since 9 o'clock. Well, I was at the theater. I didn't know anything about you waiting for me. The reason I need to speak to you only came up today." "I see. Well, I don't see why not, I suppose. Apart from being so tired I could drop. Come into my room for a few minutes, then. We certainly can't talk out here. We'd wake everyone up, and I think that would be more unpleasant for us than for them. Wait here till I put the light on in my room, and then turn the light down out there." Notice how she cares more about the other people and tenants than Kay does, because he was walking around loudly like he owned the place. So Kay did as he was told, and then even waited until Miss Bürstner came out of her room and quietly invited him once more to come in. "Sit down," she said, indicating the ottoman, while she herself remained standing by the bedpost despite the tiredness she had spoken of. She did not even take off her hat, which was small but decorated with an abundance of flowers. "What is it that you wanted, then? I'm really quite curious." She gently crossed her legs. Yet again, notice how she told him she's tired, dead tired. She does a polite thing and offers him as a guest to sit. He knows that she's tired. He's not tired. And he doesn't offer her to sit instead. Continuing. "I expect you'll say," Kay began, "that the matter really isn't all that urgent, and we don't need to talk about it right now, but—" "I never listen to introductions," said Miss Bürstner. "That makes my job so much easier," said Kay. "This morning, to some extent, through my fault, your room was made a little untidy. This happened because of people I did not know and against my will, but, as I said, because of my fault. I wanted to apologize for it." "My room?" asked Miss Bürstner, and instead of looking around the room, scrutinized Kay. "It is true," said Kay, and now for the first time they looked at each other in the eyes. "There's no point in saying exactly how this came about." But that's the interesting thing about it, said Miss Bürstner. No, said Kay. Well then, said Miss Bürstner, I don't want to force my way into any secrets. If you insist that it's of no interest, I won't insist. I'm quite happy to forgive you for it if you ask, especially as I can't see anything at all that's been left untidy. With her hand laid flat on her lower hip, she made a tour around the room. At the mat where the photographs were, she stopped. Excuse me. Look at this. Let me get a drink of water.
Intermission.
Yep.
Do you have any commentary, John?
Not really. Not anything other than we've been saying. It's a hypocrite.
Back.
Alright.
So continuing. Look at this, she cried. My photographs really have been put in the wrong places. Oh, that's horrible. Someone really has been in my room without permission. Kay nodded and quietly cursed Commoner, who worked at his bank and who was always active doing things that had neither use nor purpose. Yep. It is odd.
Those commoners always doing things.
Is the word similar in German? Like for
I don't
commoner?
think so. Nah, just
in English.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny.
It works. It works in English. It is odd, said Miss Bürstner, that I'm forced to forbid you to do something that you ought to have forbidden yourself to do, namely to come into my room when I'm not here. But I did explain to you, said Kay, and went over to join her by the photographs, that it wasn't me who interfered with your photographs, but as you don't believe me, I'll have to admit that the investigating committee brought along 3 bank employees with them. One of them must have touched your photographs, and as soon as I get a chance, I'll ask to have him dismissed from the bank. Yes, there was an investigating committee here, added Kay, as the young lady was looking at him inquiringly. Because of you? She asked. Yes, answered Kay. No, the lady cried with a laugh. Yes, they were, said Kay. You believe that I'm innocent then, don't you? Well now, innocent, said the lady. I don't want to start making any pronouncement that might have serious consequences. I don't really know you after all. It means they're dealing with a serious criminal if they send an investigating committee straight out to get him. But you're not in custody now. At least I take it you've not escaped from prison, considering that you seem quite calm. So you can't have committed any crime of that sort. Yes, said Kay, but it might be that the investigating committee could see that I'm innocent, or not so guilty as had been supposed. Yes, that's certainly a possibility, said Miss Bürstner, who seemed very interested. Listen, said Kay. You don't have much experience in legal matters. No, that's true, I don't, said Miss Bürstner, and I've often regretted it, as I'd like to know everything and I'm very interested in legal matters. There's something peculiarly attractive about the law, isn't there? But I'll certainly be perfecting my knowledge in this area, as next month I start work in a legal office. That's very good, said Kay. That means you'll be able to give me some help in my trial. That could well be, said Miss Bürstner. Why not? I like to make use of what I know. I mean it quite seriously, said Kay. Or at least half seriously, as you do. This affair is too petty to call in a lawyer, but I could make good use of someone who could give me advice. Yes, but if I'm to give you advice, I'll have to know what it's all about, said Miss Bürstner. That's exactly the problem, said Kay. I don't know that myself. So you have been making fun of me then, said Miss Bürstner, exceedingly disappointed. You really ought not to try something like that on this... Yeah. You really ought not to try something like that at this time of night. and she stepped away from the photographs where they had stood so long together. Miss Bürstner, no, said Kay. I'm not making fun of you. Please forgive me. I've already told you everything I know, more than I know, in fact, as it actually wasn't even an investigating committee. That's just what I called them, because I don't know what else to call them. There was no cross-questioning at all. I was merely arrested, but by a committee. Miss Bürstner sat on the ottoman and laughed again. What was it like then? She asked. It was terrible, said Kay. Although his mind was no longer on the subject, he had become totally absorbed by Miss Bürstner's gaze, who was supporting her chin on one hand, the elbow rested on the cushion of the ottoman, and slowly stroking her hip with the other. That's too vague, said Miss Bürstner. What's too vague? Asked Kay, when he remembered himself and asked, What would you like me to show you what it was like? He wanted to move in some way, but did not want to leave. I'm already tired, said Miss Bürstner. You arrived back so late, said Kay. Now you started telling me off. Well, I suppose I deserve it, as I shouldn't have let you in here in the first place, and it turns out there wasn't even a point. Oh, there was a point. You'll see now how important a point it was, said Kay. May I move this table away from your bedside and put it here? What do you think you're doing? Said Miss Bürstner. Of course you can't. In that case, I can't show you, said Kay, quite upset, as if Miss Bürstner had committed some incomprehensible offense against him. All right then, if you needed to show what you mean, just take the bedside table then, said Miss Bürstner, and after a short pause added in a weak voice, I'm so tired I'm allowing more than I ought to. Kay put the little table in the middle of the room and sat down behind it. You have to get a proper idea of where the people were situated. It is very interesting. I'm the supervisor. Sitting over there on the chest are two policemen. Standing next to the photographs, there are three young people. Hanging on to the handle of the window is a white blouse. I just mentioned that, by the way. And now it begins. Ah yes, I'm forgetting myself, the most important person of all, so I'm standing here in front of the table. The supervisor sitting extremely comfortably with his legs crossed and his arms hanging over the backrest here, like Sim lay about. And now it really does begin. The supervisor calls out as if he had to wake me up. In fact, he shouts at me, I'm afraid, if I'm to make it clear to you. I'll have to shout as well, and it's nothing more than my name that he shouts out. Miss Bürstner was laughing as she listened to him, laid her forefinger in her mouth so that Kay would not shout, but it was too late. Kay was too engrossed in his role and slowly called out, Joseph Kay! It was not as loud as he had threatened, but nonetheless, once he had suddenly called it out, the cry seemed gradually to spread itself all around the room. There was a series of loud, curt, irregular knocks at the door of the adjoining room. Miss Bürstner went pale and laid her hand on her heart. Kay was especially startled, as for a moment he had been quite unable to think of anything other than the events of that morning and the girl for whom he was performing. He had hardly pulled himself together when he jumped over to Miss Bürstner and took her hand. Don't be afraid, he whispered. I'll put everything right. But who can it be? It's only the living room next door. Nobody sleeps in there. Yes, they do, whispered Miss Bürstner into Kay's ear. A nephew of Mr. Grubach's. A nephew of Mrs. Grubach's. A captain in the army has been sleeping there since yesterday. There's no other room free. I've forgotten about it too. Why did you have to shout like that? You've made me quite upset. Oh, there's no reason for it, said Kay, and now, as she sank back into the cushion, kissed her forehead. Go away, she said, hurriedly sitting back up. Get out of here, go. What is it you want? He's listening at the door. He can hear everything. You're causing me so much trouble. I won't go, said Kay, until you've calmed down a bit. Come over into the other corner of the room. He won't be able to hear us there. She let him lead her there. Don't forget, he said, although this might be unpleasant for you, you're not in any real danger. You know how much esteem Miss Grubach has for me. She's the one who will make all the decisions in this, especially as the captain is her nephew, but she believes everything I say without question. What's more, she's borrowed a large sum of money from me, and that makes her dependent on me. I will confirm whatever you say to explain our being here together. however inappropriate it might be, and I guarantee to make sure that Miss Grubach will not only say she believes the explanation in public, but will believe it truly and sincerely. You will have no need to consider me in any way. If you wish to let it be known that I have attacked you, then Mrs. Grubach will be informed as such, and she will believe it without even losing her trust in me. That's how much respect she has for me. Miss Bürstner looked at the floor in front of her, quiet and a little sunk in on herself. Why would Miss Grubach not believe that I have attacked you? Added Kay. He looked at her in front of him, parted, bunched down, reddish, and firmly held in place. He thought she would look up at him, but without changing her manner, she said, "Forgive me, but it was the suddenness of the knocking that startled me so much. Not so much what the consequences of the captain being here might be. It was all so quiet after you shouted, and then there was a knocking, and that's what made me so shocked. And I was sitting right by the door, and the knocking was right next to me. Thank you for the suggestions, but I won't accept them. I can bear the responsibility for anything that happens in my room myself, and I can do so with anyone. I'm surprised you don't realize just how insulting your suggestions are and what they imply about me, although I certainly acknowledge your good intentions. But now, please go. Leave me alone. I need you to go now even more than I did earlier. The couple of minutes you asked for have grown into half an hour, more than half an hour now." Kay took hold of her hand, and then of her wrist. "You're not cross with me, no?" she said. She pulled her hand away and answered, No, I'm never cross with anyone." He grasped her wrist once more, and she tolerated it now and in that way led him to the door. He had fully intended to leave, but when he reached the door, he came to a halt as if he hadn't expected to find a door there. Miss Bürstner made use of that moment to get herself free, open the door, slip out into the hallway, and gently say to Kay from there, "Now, come along, please. Look." She pointed to the captain's door, from under which there was a light shining. "He's putting a light on, and he's laughing at us." "All right, I'm coming," said Kay. Moved forward, took hold of her, and kissed her on the mouth and then over her whole face like a thirsty animal lapping with its tongue when it eventually finds water. He finally kissed her on her neck and her throat and left his lips pressed on there for a long time. He did not look up until there was a noise from the captain's room. "I'll go now," he said. He wanted to address Miss Bürstner by her Christian name, but did not know it. She gave him a tired nod, offered him her hand to kiss as she turned away, as if she did not know what she was doing, and went back into her room with her head bowed. A short while later, Kay was lying in his bed. He very soon went to sleep, but before he did, he thought a little while about his behavior. He was satisfied with it, but felt some surprise that he was not more satisfied. He was seriously worried about Miss Bürstner because of the captain. End of chapter 1.
How the fuck do people think he's innocent?
Beats me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess they're thinking of it literally, first of all, but like, what a fucking asshole.
Doesn't think about other people at all. She's clearly uncomfortable with him, doesn't like him, doesn't think highly of him, and he pushed himself on her.
Yep. No, and then everything I was saying earlier about how, maybe he wasn't wanting his landlady to be so nosy about her, I fucking take it back now that I know what this was about.
Yep.
Like, he fucking removes any, like, doubt you could have to presume his innocence.
Yep. And he was satisfied with it. He sees nothing wrong with it.
Mm-hmm. But he was surprised that he wasn't a little more satisfied about it.
Anyways, this was good. I love this book. Really great story. And we're not even going over like a lot of the symbolic stuff. That's just like the way things are arranged, the spatial relationships described, the person-to-person things. That's too much detail to go into, like for like a kind of casual analytic reading here. But a lot of that stuff is very purposeful and very meaningful as well. But anyways, for those of you listening, I hope you enjoyed it. We shall continue this as soon as possible. I do want to complete this